Figure it out yourself. That's what my wife Angela screamed as she gunned the engine and left me standing in a Shell gas station parking lot in Reno, Nevada, 140 miles from home in Sacramento. Her sisters Rachel and Emma were laughing in the backseat like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. My name is David Mitchell. I'm 32 years old. Work as a construction engineer for Morrison Engineering. I'd been married to Angela for 7 years. We'd driven up here for her college friend's wedding. Supposed to be a nice weekend getaway, the whole ride up. Something felt wrong. Angela kept exchanging looks with her sisters in the rearview mirror. Whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. When I asked what was going on, she'd flash that smile and say, "Nothing, babe, just sister stuff." I should have trusted my gut. We'd stopped for gas about 20 minutes outside Reno. I went inside to grab some snacks and use the restroom. When I came out, they were already in the car, engine running. Angela rolled down the window with this weird grin. "Get in the car, Angela," I said. Walking toward the passenger door, "Actually," she said, "we've been talking, and we think you need to learn some independence." "What are you talking about?" Rachel leaned forward from the back seat. "You're always so clingy, David," following Angela around like a lost puppy. "We thought this would be good for you," Emma chimed in. "A little adventure." I stood there, keys in my hand. Except they weren't car keys, they were house keys. Angela had insisted we take her car because mine was too cramped for 4 people. "This isn't funny," I said. "Whatever joke this is, cut it out." Angela's smile got wider. "It's not a joke. It's a prank. You're always so serious, David. Learn to laugh a little. Figure it out yourself," she yelled, and hit the gas. I watched their taillights disappear down Highway 80. Standing there with my wallet, my phone, and a growing realization that my wife and her sisters had just abandoned me in the middle of nowhere. The October wind cut through my jacket. I could smell snow coming in the mountains. I called Angela's phone, straight to voicemail. Called Rachel's number, same thing. Emma had blocked my number months ago, after some argument I couldn't even remember. That's when I knew this wasn't some stupid prank that would end in an hour. This was something else entirely. Something that showed me exactly what my wife and her sisters thought of me. I walked back into the gas station and asked the clerk about getting home. "Greyhound stops right here in Reno," he said. "Station's about 15 minutes by Uber." I pulled out my phone and called for a ride. $80 I couldn't really afford, but I needed to get to that bus station. I'd met Angela 8 years earlier at a job site. She was doing environmental consulting for a commercial project my crew was working on. Smart, funny, with this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room when she talked to me. Her sisters were different. Rachel was 3 years older, worked as a lawyer for some corporate firm, always had opinions about everything. Emma was the baby at 27, trying to make it as an influencer, but never short on attitude. From the beginning, they treated me like I was taking their sister away from them. Family dinners where they'd make inside jokes I couldn't follow, vacations where they'd book activities without asking if I wanted to join. Small things that added up over time. They were just protective, Angela would say whenever I brought it up. "They'll warm up to you." That they never did. If anything, they got worse after we got married. Rachel started making comments about how I held Angela back from traveling more, from taking risks. Emma would roll her eyes whenever I offered to help with anything. "Not everything needs a man to solve it," she'd say. I started noticing other things too. How Angela would text constantly when we were together, always with her sisters. How she'd change plans at the last minute because Rachel or Emma had some crisis that needed immediate attention. Last year, Angela forgot our anniversary because she was helping Emma move apartments. The year before that, she missed my birthday dinner because Rachel was having problems with her boyfriend. "Family comes first," she'd always say, and I got that. I respected it. But I was supposed to be family too. The warning signs were there during the drive to Reno. How they'd insisted I didn't need to bring my truck because we'd all ride together. How Angela had booked the hotel room under her name only. How Rachel kept making jokes about how I never did anything spontaneous. "Remember when you used to be fun?" Emma had asked from the back seat. "Before you got all domestic and boring." I'd laughed it off, but it stung. I worked 60-hour weeks to keep us comfortable. I fixed things around the house, planned vacations, remembered important dates. I thought that was what being a good husband meant. The Uber driver was quiet on the ride to the Greyhound station. I kept checking my phone, expecting an apology text, maybe a panicked call when they realized they'd gone too far. But nothing came. The bus ride to Sacramento took 4 hours. 4 hours to sit in that seat and think about my marriage. About the woman I'd spent 7 years trying to make happy. Round midnight, somewhere outside Stockton, it hit me. This wasn't about teaching me independence or helping me loosen up. This was about humiliation. About showing me exactly where I stood in their little sisterhood. I thought about all the times I'd given in when they wanted to change our plans. All the times I'd bitten my tongue when they made jokes at my expense. All the times I'd apologized for things that weren't my fault just to keep the peace. The worst part wasn't being abandoned. The worst part was realizing this was probably something they'd planned for weeks, maybe months, sitting around Rachel's apartment, cooking up the scheme, laughing about how clueless I was. By the time the bus pulled into Sacramento at 6 in the morning, I'd made my decision. I took a cab home, expecting to find Angela's car in the driveway, but it wasn't there. The house was empty, exactly like we'd left it Friday morning. I sat at the kitchen table and called in sick to work. Then I did something I'd never done before. I started going through Angela's things, not because I was jealous or suspicious, but because I needed to understand who I'd been married to. Her laptop was in the living room, still logged into Facebook. She'd always been careless about closing tabs. I found the group chat between her and her sisters going back months. Screenshots of our text conversations that she'd shared with them, complete with laughing emojis, photos of me sleeping that she'd sent them with captions like dead to the world as usual, and zero awareness. But it was the thread about the Reno trip that broke something inside me. Rachel had suggested at first we should totally ditch him somewhere and see how long it takes him to figure out how to get home. Emma, yes, he's so dependent on Angela for everything. Angela, you guys are terrible. But also it would be hilarious. They'd planned every detail, the gas station stop, the story about needing independence, even the backup plan. If I somehow made it home before them, he'll probably just call his mom or something. Jessica had written, "Big baby." I screenshot everything, saved it to a thumb drive. Then closed the laptop. I went upstairs, packed a bag and left. I didn't leave a note. I didn't turn off the utilities or lock the door. I just walked out the same way they'd driven away from me. The difference was, I wasn't coming back. I drove my truck to my brother Kevin's place in San Jose. He worked night shifts at a tech manufacturing plant and had a spare room in his apartment. When I showed up at his door with a duffel bag and no explanation, he just nodded and handed me a beer. "How long you staying?" he asked. "Don't know yet." Kevin had never liked Angela. He'd never said it outright, but I could tell by the way he'd get quiet when she was around, how he'd always have some excuse to leave early when we had family gatherings. I told him what happened, all of it. The prank, the group chats, the months of planning behind my back. "Jesus, David," he said when I finished, "you're better off without her." Monday morning, I called my supervisor at Morrison and requested a transfer to our San Jose office. We'd been short-handed on a hospital renovation project, and they needed experienced guys. My boss didn't ask questions, just said I could start Wednesday. Tuesday afternoon my phone started ringing. Angela was back. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "David, where are you? I came home and you're just gone. That's not like you. Call me back. We need to talk about this." No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just confusion that I'd had the nerve to disappear on her. I blocked her number. An hour later Rachel called. I blocked her too, then Emma. But they were clever. They started calling from other numbers. Work phones, numbers I didn't recognize. Always the same message. I was overreacting. It was just a joke. I needed to come home so we could work this out. Thursday, Kevin came home from his shift with a weird look on his face. "Your wife's here," he said. "She's sitting in her car outside." I looked out the window. There was Angela's Honda parked across the street. She saw me in the window and got out, walking toward the apartment building. I met her in the lobby before she could knock on Kevin's door. "David, thank God," she said, reaching for me. "I've been so worried." I stepped back. "What do you want, Angela?" "I want you to come home. I want us to talk about this like adults." "Talk about what?" "How you abandoned me 140 miles from home, how you and your sisters planned it for months." Her face changed. The concerned wife act dropped for just a second, and I saw something else underneath. Irritation. Like I was being unreasonable. "It was a prank, David. You're acting like we committed a crime. You left me stranded. You laughed about it. You planned it for months, because you needed it," she said. "And there it was, the real reason. You're so dependent, so clingy. We thought if you had to figure something out on your own for once, maybe you'd grow up a little." The lobby was quiet except for the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 7 years, and realized I didn't know her at all. "I'm not coming home," I said. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't just disappear because your feelings got hurt. Watch me." I turned and walked back to the elevator. She followed, talking faster now, making promises, threats, explanations that didn't make sense. But I stopped listening. When the elevator doors closed, she was still talking. Friday morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Rachel. Angela's really upset. You need to fix this." I showed it to Kevin over coffee. "Change your number," he said. So I did. 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new routine. Work at the hospital site during the day, helping Kevin with his projects on weekends, learning what it felt like to make decisions without checking with someone first. I'd found a small apartment on the south side of San Jose, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No shared decisions about furniture or paint colors, no compromise on which shows to watch or what to have for dinner. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. That's when my mother called. I'd given her my new number, along with Kevin and my supervisor at work, David. Honey, Angela came by the house. She said you're having some kind of breakdown, that you disappeared after a family trip and won't answer her calls. I could hear the worry in my mother's voice. Mom had always liked Angela, thought she was good for me, stable, responsible. It's not a breakdown, Mom. We're having problems. What kind of problems that can't be worked out? I didn't want to get into details. Didn't want to explain the group chats or the planning or the months of subtle cruelty that had led up to that moment in Reno. It would sound petty, like I was overreacting to a joke. I'll call you later, Mom. I need to think about some things. But after I hung up, I realized Angela was still playing the game, still controlling the narrative, making me look like the unstable one who'd abandoned his marriage over nothing. I drove back to Sacramento that weekend, not to the house Angela and I had shared, but to my buddy Marcus's place. He worked construction too, had been at my wedding. Heard you and Angela split up, he said when I showed up at his door. Sorry man, what did you hear? Just that you took off after some fight. She seemed pretty torn up about it. There it was again, Angela's version of events where I was the bad guy who'd overreacted and abandoned his wife. Marcus offered me a beer and we sat on his back porch. I told him the real story, all of it. That's messed up, he said when I finished. Why would she do something like that? I think she wanted me gone, I said. Not permanently, but I think she liked having the power to hurt me. To show me how little I mattered. Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he said, you know what I remember about your wedding? I shook my head. During the reception, you were talking to some of my crew guys. Just normal conversation, but every time you'd laugh or seem like you were enjoying yourself, Angela would come over and interrupt, find some reason you needed to be somewhere else. I remembered that. How she'd kept pulling me away from conversations, saying we needed to thank this relative, or take photos with that group. I thought she was just being a good hostess. Maybe, Marcus said, or maybe she doesn't like seeing you happy without her. That night, I drove past the house where Angela and I had lived. Her car was in the driveway, lights on in the living room. I could see her shadow moving around inside. I didn't stop. Just drove past and kept going. But seeing that house, remembering the life I'd built there, made me realize something important. I wasn't just running away from a bad marriage, I was running towards something better. Over the next few months, I started taking steps I should have taken years ago. I opened my own bank account, transferred my half of our savings, found a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. The lawyer, a straightforward woman named Patricia Coleman, listened to my story without judgment. Do you have documentation of the harassment? She asked. I showed her the blocked numbers on my phone, the messages from Rachel and Emma, the way they'd been calling my workplace. I also showed her the screenshots from Angela's laptop. And you said she went to your parents' house? Yeah. Told them I was having a breakdown. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. We can work with this. California is a no-fault divorce state, but the harassment could be relevant for other purposes. I signed the papers that afternoon. Patricia would handle serving Angela and starting the proceedings. One more thing, she said as I was leaving. Don't engage with any contact attempts. Don't respond to calls, texts, or in-person visits. Anything you say can be used to paint you as unstable or vindictive. What if she shows up at my work? Document it, call the police if necessary. But don't engage. The hospital renovation project was going well. I'd been promoted to project supervisor, overseeing a team of 8 guys. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and nobody cared about my personal life as long as I showed up and did my job. I started taking evening classes at the community college, business management, something I'd always been interested in but never had time for when Angela and her sisters were constantly demanding attention. For the first time in years, I had space to think, to figure out what I actually wanted instead of just reacting to what other people expected. 4 months after I'd filed for divorce, Kevin called me at work. That lawyer of yours wants to talk to you, says it's important. I met Patricia at her office that afternoon. She had a stack of papers on her desk and a satisfied look on her face. Your wife's been busy, she said. She hired her own attorney, and they are trying to claim abandonment. Says you left without warning and refused to participate in marriage counseling. Abandonment? It's a stretch, but they're arguing that your leaving was deliberate and vindictive. They want to contest the division of assets. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Even now, even after everything, Angela was trying to control the situation. But here's the interesting part. Patricia continued, I had our investigator do some digging. Your wife's been telling people that you became abusive, and she had to escape for her safety. That's a lie, I know, and I can prove it. She showed me printouts of Instagram posts, Angela and her sisters raising shot glasses at some bar in Reno. Huge smiles, posted at 11 p.m., the same day they'd left me at that gas station. This destroys their narrative, Patricia said. They can't claim they were afraid of you while simultaneously celebrating your absence. I stared at the photos in one of them. Emma was wearing my Sacramento Kings cap, the one I'd left in the car when I went into the gas station. There's more, Patricia said. She handed me another stack of papers, screenshots of the conversations I'd seen on Angela's laptop, plus dozens more I hadn't found. Months of planning, laughing about my reactions, making bets about how long it would take me to crawl back home. We file our response tomorrow, Patricia said, and then we end this. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews. Angela sat at the other table with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he charged by the hour. She'd lost weight, looked tired. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she tried to smile like we were still on the same team. Her attorney went first, painted me as an unstable husband who'd abandoned his wife after a minor disagreement, said I'd disappeared without warning, refused counseling, and was trying to punish Angela for a harmless prank. Your Honor, Mr. David Mitchell was clearly looking for an excuse to leave his marriage. He used a simple misunderstanding between family members as justification for abandoning his responsibilities. Patricia stood up when it was our turn. She was calm, professional, deadly. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that contradicts the petitioner's claims. She handed the judge the stack of screenshots, the social media posts, the documented harassment. Piece by piece, she dismantled Angela's story. These are text messages between the petitioner and her sisters, planning what they call a prank for months in advance. Here are social media posts from the night they abandoned my client, celebrating their actions. And here are records of continued harassment after my client requested no contact. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Angela's attorney whispered urgently to her, but I could see the panic in her face. Furthermore, Patricia continued, the petitioner has been spreading false claims about my client's mental state and character to mutual friends and family members. This is a pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse, not the actions of a concerned spouse. When the judge finally looked up, his expression was neutral but firm. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting the divorce as requested. Assets will be divided equally with no spousal support awarded to either party. The court finds no evidence of abandonment or abuse by the respondent. Angela tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway, but Patricia stepped between us. No contact, she said firmly. The order is still in effect. I walked to my truck without looking back. 8 months after that gas station in Reno, it was finally over. The business management courses paid off. 6 months later, I started my home construction company, Mitchell Contracting. Small jobs at first, bathroom renovations, deck repairs, but the work was steady. And customers appreciated having someone who showed up on time and did what he promised. Kevin became my first employee when his plant laid off half the night shift. Then Marcus joined us when word got around that we were honest contractors who didn't cut corners. I bought a small house on the west side of San Jose, nothing fancy, but it had a garage for my tools and a yard where I could think. No shared decisions, no committee meetings about paint colors. About a year after the divorce was final, I ran into Marcus at the hardware store. We were picking up supplies for different jobs now, but still grabbed coffee sometimes. You hear about Angela? He asked. I hadn't thought about her in months. What about her? Married some guy from her work about 8 months after your divorce was final. Lasted about 10 months before they split. I picked up the screws I'd come for and headed toward the checkout. Don't you want to know what happened to Marcus? Called after me. Not really, I said, and I meant it. Angela and her sisters eventually faced consequences for their actions. Rachel's law firm quietly asked her to leave after a client complained about her unprofessional conduct. Emma's influencer career never took off, especially after some of her followers found out about the gas station incident and called her out publicly. Angela's quick remarriage and subsequent divorce damaged her reputation in our old social circle. The narrative she'd tried to control finally caught up with her. But I didn't learn most of this until much later, and by then, it didn't matter. 2 years after starting Mitchell Contracting, we had 12 employees and a waiting list of customers. I'd bought a bigger house with an office space, started dating a teacher named Sarah who laughed at my jokes and never made me feel like I had to apologize for being myself. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Standing in that gas station parking lot in Reno watching those taillights disappear, I thought my life was ending. Turned out, it was just beginning. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. You just have to figure it out yourself. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.